A man slammed his glass against the wall. The shards scattered across the marble floor of the executive suite, and every person in the room froze except one. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Marcus Bellwether roared, his finger jabbing toward the woman in the navy blazer standing across from him. "I'm about to find out exactly who you choose to be in the next 35 minutes, Nora Vance said, her voice flat and unbothered. "Because that's when you're due on stage in front of 250 international delegates, 8 of whom report directly to people who fund your company's board." The room didn't breathe. Marcus stared at her, mouth open, waiting for the apology that wasn't coming. 3 men near the entrance hadn't moved. They'd come to discuss a logistics issue and instead walked into a standoff that none of them would forget. Jin-Ho stood loosest of the 3, arms relaxed, watching with open fascination. Beside him, Wei Cheng had gone very still, studying Nora's face the way he studied a balance sheet, looking for the number that explained everything else. And at the back, Daniel Okafor said nothing at all. He simply watched, patient, the way a man watches weather roll in. Marcus laughed, short, ugly, disbelieving. "You think you could talk to me like that?" "I know I can," Nora said. That landed like a slap. The hotel's general manager, a man who'd worked events for 19 years, looked like his legs might give out. Nora turned to him without waiting for Marcus to respond. "Get housekeeping in here. Security stays at the door." Then, back to Marcus, calm as still water. "You have 2 choices. Walk onto that stage with your dignity intact, and we never speak of this again. Or keep going, and I make sure this reaches the press desk before your keynote does." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You wouldn't dare." "No heat in that," Nora said, which is what made it worse. He looked around. 6 witnesses, 3 blinking cameras, and a woman who hadn't blinked once. He looked away first. He straightened his jacket, picked his pride up off the floor, and walked out without another word. The suite exhaled, and Nora Vance, the woman who had just stared down a furious executive before 7 in the morning, was already moving on to the next disaster, because there were 3 more waiting, and the doors opened in less than 90 minutes. Nora Vance had been running events for 11 years, and in that time, she had developed a single rule that governed everything she did: prepare for failure so thoroughly that success becomes inevitable. She was 34 years old, originally from Charlotte, North Carolina, and had built her reputation the hard way, by being the person everyone called when an event was already on fire. She didn't manage conferences. She rescued them. This particular conference was the International Growth Forum, a 4-day summit held at the Marbury Grand in downtown Charlotte, bringing together executives, investors, and government delegations from across 3 continents. 300 attendees. $200 million in combined sponsorship and partnership deals expected to be discussed across the week. And Nora was the one person standing between all of that and total collapse. She had a small team, her assistant Renee, who could read Nora's mood from across a room and translate it into action before Nora finished a sentence, and a rotating crew of about 40 staff who Nora had trained personally on what she called the invisible standard: fix it before anyone notices it was broken. The 3 men who'd witnessed the confrontation with Marcus Bellwether were not ordinary attendees. They were among the most significant guests at the summit, each representing a different kind of power. Jin-Ho Park was the CEO of Seoul-based consumer tech company that had expanded into North America 2 years prior. He was warm, magnetic, the kind of man who made every room feel like a party he'd personally arranged. He smiled easily, laughed often, and had a reputation, fair or not, for being more interested in people than in spreadsheets. Wei Cheng ran the analytics division of one of the largest investment funds in Asia. He was precise to the point of being unsettling, a man who treated conversations like data sets and rarely wasted a word. People who worked with him described him as brilliant, exacting, and almost entirely without small talk. And Daniel Okafor, quiet, deliberate, the head of a logistics and infrastructure conglomerate with operations spanning 4 continents, was the kind of man who said the least and was listened to the most. He noticed everything. He rarely commented on what he noticed. None of the 3 had spoken to Nora directly before that morning. By the end of the day, all 3 would have. Because the morning that started with a thrown glass didn't end there. It was only the first crisis of many, and Nora Vance was about to spend the next 5 days proving, over and over, exactly why she was the only person in the building who could hold all of it together. The moment Nora stepped into the hallway outside the executive suite, three things happened at once. Her earpiece crackled. Nora, the keynote speaker's flight just got diverted. He's not going to make it. Her phone rang. The area code belonged to Crestline Capital, their largest sponsor. And Renee came sprinting around the corner, a stack of folders clutched to her chest like she was carrying live grenades. Nora, pick one. Go, Nora said, already walking fast. Keynote speaker's stuck in Raleigh. Weather diversion. He says he can't make it. Crestline Capital is threatening to pull their sponsorship, $300,000. And the catering shipment for the closing lunch got held up at customs. We don't have the protein for tonight's dinner. How long until doors open? Renee, check her watch. 82 minutes. Okay. Nora grabbed the first phone from an intern's hand. Pull the backup speaker list. Only people already in the building in Charlotte right now. No virtual options. No maybe. Confirmed and physically present. She handed that phone off and grabbed a second. Tell Crestline's director I'll be in his suite in 6 minutes. Not 7. 6. If he leaves before I get there, this conversation doesn't happen today. She ended that call and answered the one already buzzing in her hand. If this is about the food, she said before the caller could speak, find a substitute protein, restructure the menu around what we actually have, and give the new dish a name that sounds like it was always the plan. If anyone asks, this was the plan. She hung up. Renee blinked. Rename it. Confidence reads as competence, Nora said. Move. They pushed through the ballroom doors, and the noise hit them like a wave. Technicians on ladders fought with lighting rigs that kept flickering. A feedback loop screamed from the speakers every 40 seconds like clockwork. Florists argued in 2 different languages over centerpiece heights. A registration team stood huddled around scanners that refused to read a single badge. And at the far end of the room, a 12-foot sponsor banner display leaned at an angle that suggested it had already given up on standing at all. Why is that still tilted? Nora called out. A stagehand spun around. Loading crew brought it through the wrong door, and the floor manager said we needed sign-off before. You have sign-off. For people on that frame, right now. Lift it, don't drag it. If that base scratches the marble, every one of us is having a very different conversation tonight. They scrambled. Nora kept moving, dropping to her knees beside a registration table to personally reboot a scanner the tech assigned to it couldn't fix. 30 seconds later, it was working. She didn't wait for thanks. She was already walking toward the next fire. This was the rhythm of her mornings, not panic, but sequence. Problem, solution, next problem, next solution. To anyone watching, it looked like chaos. To Nora, it was a checklist she'd written in her head before the day even started. Wei Cheng was watching. He stood near the edge of the ballroom with the summit's coordinator, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. She's not reacting, he said quietly. The coordinator frowned. What do you mean? Every decision she's made since we walked in here was already prepared. She's not solving problems as they appear. He paused, almost himself. She anticipated them. She's executing a plan she built before any of this started. He watched Nora across the room, take a stack of misprinted name badges from a young staffer's trembling hands, reprint them correctly in under 20 seconds using a backup station, hand them back, and touch the girl's shoulder briefly before moving on. No announcement. No fanfare. Just done. Wei Cheng filed that away the way he filed everything. Carefully. Permanently. The backup speaker turned out to be Dr. Adiz Bello, a development economist who'd flown in 2 days early and was staying on the 18th floor. Renee called her room while Nora took the stairs 2 at a time, working through scenarios in her head. Her credentials are actually stronger than the original speakers, Renee said into the earpiece. I'm calling now. Be honest with her. Tell her exactly what happened. Ask if she's willing. Don't oversell it. Don't beg. Give her the facts and let her decide. And if she says no, she won't say no, Nora said. But if you haven't reached her in 3 minutes, I'll call her myself in 4. She didn't have to. Dr. Bello said yes almost immediately, something Nora would later attribute to the fact that people who'd spent their careers solving real problems tended to recognize a real problem when it landed in their lap. The Crestline Capital conversation was harder. Derek Hollis, Crestline's regional director, was waiting in the second-floor lounge, the kind of quiet space hotels built specifically to make rich men feel like everything was negotiable. He stood by the window, arms crossed, jaw set, clearly rehearsing whatever speech he'd been building for the last 40 minutes. Nora walked in alone. She didn't apologize for the time. She sat down across from him, placed her tablet on the table, and turned the screen to face him before he could open his mouth. The sign placement agreement, she said. Premier corridor placement, adjacent to registration. Your banners are 40 feet from the entrance. Verified this morning. The terms of the contract have been met. Derek's eyes narrowed. The spirit of the agreement is reflected in what was signed, Nora said, her voice even. No edge. No condescension. Just facts. However, I want Crestline's presence at this summit to feel like the investment it is. So here's what I can offer that wasn't in the original contract. She swiped to the next screen. One branded pillar at the main entrance. Every delegate arriving this morning walks past it. That positioning was never promised to you. I'm offering it as a courtesy. Derek looked at the screen, then at her. The main entrance, he repeated. When? 20 minutes. A pause. His arms uncrossed. That works. Nora stood, collected her tablet, and started for the door. Ms. Vance. She looked back. Something had shifted in his expression. The look of a man who'd come in ready for a fight, and instead found himself disarmed without quite knowing how. I expected this conversation to go differently, he said. Most people do, Nora said and walked out. When she pushed back through the ballroom doors 7 minutes later, the room had transformed. The display stood straight and locked in place. The flowers had been recut. The audio was clean. The scanners worked. Registration lines moved with a smoothness that suggested the morning's chaos had never happened. And at the front of the room, Dr. Bellows stood at the podium, running through her notes with growing confidence. Flanked by two staffers Nora had personally briefed on how to support her without overwhelming her. Nora watched from the back for a moment. Then she exhaled, once short and quiet. The only version of relief she allowed herself on event days. You called her yourself, Renee said, appearing at her elbow. You took 3 minutes and 40 seconds, Nora said. I had signal issues. I know. That's why I called her. I know that too. Nora was already scrolling to the next item on her tablet. Registration count, 180 confirmed. Good. 40 minutes to doors. Walk the south corridor with me. They moved, and behind them, unnoticed, Jin-Ho stepped fully into the ballroom for the first time that morning and looked at the space. Rebuilt from disaster in under an hour. He looked at it the way someone looks at something they hadn't expected to find impressive and had been proven wrong. Wei Cheng stepped up beside him. She fixed the audio problem too. She fixed everything, Jin-Ho said. Not everything, Wei Cheng replied. She prioritized. There's a difference. They watched as Nora stopped at the south corridor entrance, rattling off instructions to a cluster of staff, while simultaneously redirecting a lost delegate back to the correct registration line, without breaking her sentence. Daniel Okafor arrived last. He stood at the entrance and took it all in. The room, the staff moving with purpose, the entire setup that had come together from nothing in under 2 hours. And Nora Vance in the middle of it, not managing from a distance, but in it, moving through it, holding it together with the kind of competence that didn't need to announce itself. The doors opened at 9. 250 people flooded into the ballroom in waves, delegates, investors, journalists, interpreters, assistants. The energy shifted instantly, from preparation to performance, from Nora's world to everyone else's. She stood near the audio station, watching not the people but the space around them, sight lines, body language, anything that sounded wrong. 82 minutes ago, this room had been a disaster. Now it looked like nothing had ever gone wrong at all. That was the job. Not the applause. Not the credit. The moment no one ever saw. The afternoon networking break spilled onto the hotel's rooftop terrace, and the Charlotte skyline glowed gold in the early evening light. Business cards changed hands. Interpreters worked in tight clusters. People who ran companies and moved markets stood against the skyline and talked about whatever came next. Nora wasn't there for leisure. She was juggling 3 things at once. Catering logistics, a schedule shift for the evening session, and a message from the summit's board about the gala running order. When she rounded the corner of the bar and stopped, Jin-Ho was standing directly in her path. Not by accident. He held a glass of water and wore the expression of a man trying very hard to look like he hadn't been waiting. You weren't even going to pretend you weren't waiting there, she said. He laughed, genuine, unguarded. No, I was absolutely waiting. She almost smiled. I have about 90 seconds. That's all I need. He glanced at his watch like he was negotiating a deal. 2 minutes. She checked hers. 1.5. He accepted that without complaint, which she noted. The replacement speaker, he said. That was your call? Yes. You had, what, 90 minutes? 82. He shook his head slowly. At my company, I have an entire team whose job is crisis management. Systems built specifically for moments like this. He looked at her, not with flattery, but something more direct than that. You did what they do. Alone. Before breakfast, I also fixed an audio issue and talked a furious sponsor off a ledge, she said. But I appreciate the acknowledgement. He laughed again, and she realized she liked the sound of it. Easy, real, not performed for anyone's benefit. You already know who I am, he said. Ido. Does that change anything? She studied him for a moment. No. Should it? He smiled like she'd just handed him something rare. Nora Vance, he said. I'd very much like to continue this conversation tonight. After the evening session, perhaps. She pulled out her tablet. If the evening session runs on time, I'll have 10 minutes between closing remarks and gala setup. I'll take 10 minutes. You'll probably get 4, she said and walked past him. She heard him laugh behind her. She kept walking. Wei Cheng found her an hour later. Not on the terrace, not at the bar, not in any of the places people went when they wanted to be found. He found her in the service corridor behind the main stage, kneeling beside a tangle of cables, working through a connection issue with one of the technical crew. She didn't hear him approach. The feedback issue this morning, he said. Monitor 3. Bad ground connection. You identified it in under 10 seconds. She looked up then stood. 8, actually. Ow! Because I did a full technical walkthrough at 5 this morning. I knew every potential failure point in this room before anyone else arrived. He was quiet for a moment. You prepared for failure before you prepared for success. Success is just what happens when your failure preparation is thorough enough. Something shifted in his expression. That's a philosophy, he said, not dismissively, but turning it over, examining it. It's Tuesday, she said. He almost smiled. She could see the movement at the corner of his mouth. I asked about you, he said. I know. My assistant told me you asked what time my day usually ends. He looked momentarily caught. And she told you she didn't know, which was her way of protecting me from answering a question I hadn't decided to answer yet. Fair, he said, and meant it. She studied him. The stillness, the precision, the way he engaged with every exchange like it was data worth collecting. You don't do small talk, she said. No, you find it inefficient. I find it dishonest. He held her. She heard his footsteps leave the corridor. She also heard the small sound he made before he walked away. Not quite a laugh, but close. Daniel Okafor didn't seek her out that day. He didn't appear in corridors. He didn't wait near bars. He didn't ask Renee questions. He simply moved through the day at his own pace, attended his sessions, engaged with his delegation, and did what he had always done. He paid attention. He noticed when Nora's team shifted formation during the afternoon break, signaling a plan change had been executed mid-session. He noticed she ate nothing until after 2 in the afternoon, and even then it was half a sandwich eaten while walking. He noticed she checked on Dr. Bello twice after the session ended, not to evaluate the speech, but just to make sure she felt all right. He noticed all of it, and he said nothing about any of it to anyone, until the evening when Nora turned and found him standing 2 feet behind her. She hadn't heard him arrive. She didn't startle. She just met his eyes. What your mother told you, he said, about making something better without making the person feel worse. Nora went still. She'd said that yesterday, in passing, to Renee. He hadn't been part of that conversation. You heard that. I was passing through the corridor, he said simply. I wasn't trying to overhear. She studied him. It stayed with you. Yes. What? He considered the question seriously, the way he seemed to consider everything. Because most people with that level of discipline use it for themselves, he said, for their own outcomes, their own results. He paused. You use it for everyone else. She held his gaze. Does that bother you? That you use it for everyone else? That no one uses it for you? The terrace buzzed with sound and movement around them, but Nora felt something she almost never felt in professional spaces. Seen, not exposed, something harder to manage than exposure. I'm fine, she said. He nodded slowly, like he'd heard both the answer and the thing underneath it. I know, he said. That's not what I asked. She looked at him for a long, careful moment. Then someone called her name from across the terrace. She broke the gaze. Excuse me. She walked toward the next thing that needed her. She felt his eyes on her back until she rounded the corner. She didn't look back, but she wanted to. Under sleep that night. She lay in her hotel room on the 22nd floor while Charlotte hummed beneath her, and her mind refused to settle. She'd been running hard for 4 days. She knew this kind of exhaustion. She knew how to box it up and close the lid and wake up ready for the next sequence. What she didn't know was how to box up Daniel Okafor. Not because he was complicated, because he wasn't. He was the clearest thing in a week full of things requiring constant interpretation. She thought about Jin-Ho, who made her feel like the most interesting person in any room and seemed to genuinely mean it. Who'd waited in her path and asked for 90 seconds and accepted 45 without complaint. She thought about Wei Cheng, who didn't perform interests he didn't have, who looked at the way she worked like it was the most fascinating dataset he'd encountered in years, who said things directly that most people buried under 6 layers of social politeness. And she thought about Daniel, who hadn't sought her out once all day, who'd simply paid attention, who'd carried a sentence she said to someone else for 24 hours, who'd asked not whether she was managing, but whether she was all right. She turned on her side. Outside, the city ran itself through the small hours. She thought about her mother. The person worth choosing, her mother had said once, in a conversation Nora hadn't realized she was storing for later, isn't the most exciting one. It isn't the most accomplished one. It's the one who sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. She thought about the way Daniel had stepped aside to clear her path that morning without being asked. Such a small thing. The kind of thing most people wouldn't even notice doing. She noticed. She always noticed. She closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come quickly, but when it did, it was the first genuinely quiet sleep she'd had all week. On the 5th morning of the summit arrived the way the worst days always do, quietly, without warning, looking exactly like every other morning until it wasn't. Nora was in the operations room at 6:15, reviewing the gala run sheet, when Renee walked in and placed a single printed page on the desk. It was a screenshot of an online article. The headline read, Summit Director at Center of Executive Love Triangle. Charlotte's most talked about story no one will confirm. Nora read it once, then set it down. Who published this? A gossip site. Shared 600 times since midnight. Does it use my name? Full name. Photo from the summit registration. Nora exhaled slowly. Controlled. Does it say anything technically false? Renee hesitated. It's written to imply things without stating them. It describes real interactions, but frames them as something more than professional. It suggests 3 executives have been competing for your attention and that you've been encouraging it. I haven't encouraged anything. I know that. But the framing doesn't require proof. It just requires attention. Does it affect the summit itself? The programming? No. But 3 journalists have already emailed the press office asking for comment. 2 are international outlets. And the 3 men, I don't know if they've seen it yet. Tell the press office, no comment on personal matters. If they push, redirect to the summit's official outcomes and delegate feedback. Nothing else. Nora paused. What about the article itself? Find one factual error. There's always one. Renee scanned it again. They call you a liaison in the 2nd paragraph. You're the events director. That's a professional mischaracterization. Push back on that specifically and request a correction. It gives us a foothold without engaging with the rest of it. Renee made a note, then looked up. Nora, are you okay? Nora picked up her tablet. I'm working, she said. That's always the answer. She walked out into the day. Jin-Ho found her by 8:45. He appeared at the corridor entrance near the main ballroom. I saw it, he said when he reached her. So did 600 other people. 800 now. He wasn't smiling. I want you to know it had nothing to do with me or anyone on my team. If someone from your team had spoken to that outlet, she said, it wouldn't have been that sloppy. The source is someone adjacent to the summit's operations, someone who's been watching all week and decided there was value in creating story. This isn't your fault. He was quiet a moment. It'll follow you, he said. These things follow women in ways they don't follow men. I've watched careers get reshaped by whispers that had nothing to do with performance. I know. Does that concern you? It concerns me that I have a gala tonight that requires my full attention, and instead I'm standing in a corridor talking about an article I can't control. She softened slightly. But I appreciate you coming to say this directly. He nodded slowly. For what it's worth, he said, the parts of it that were observational rather than invented, they weren't wrong. He looked at her. I haven't pretended I wasn't drawn to you this week. You're the most capable person in this building, and also the most interesting. Both of those things are true, and I'm not embarrassed by either. He paused. I'm not asking for anything. I know the timing is impossible. I just didn't want you to think I'd deny what I felt to protect my own reputation. He took a breath. You deserve people who don't make you invisible. That's all I wanted to say. She stood in the corridor a moment. Then she picked up her tablet and kept moving. Wei Cheng found her during the mid-morning break, in the same service corridor as the day before. He didn't mention the article at all. I want to finish the conversation we started, he said, without preamble. She looked at him. About operational failure? About information. And trust. He paused. I've been thinking about what you said, that most failures come from missing information, not bad decisions or bad people, just gaps in what was known at the time. He stopped walking, which meant she stopped too. I've spent my career assuming that if I gathered enough data, every decision would eventually become clear. This week has made me less certain of that. She studied his face. The precision was still there, the control, but something underneath it had shifted. Some things can't be measured, she said. No. He was quiet for a moment. But they can be trusted. That's what I'm learning. That some things require trust before they can be understood. You're not good at that, she said. It wasn't a question. No, I'm not. He held her gaze. I leave tomorrow morning. Early flight. I want to be honest with you before I go. He paused. I know the timing is wrong. I know I'm not easy to be with. I know the distance between here and where I live doesn't disappear just because two people wanted it to. He took a breath. What I don't know is whether any of that matters more than what I felt every time we've spoken this week. She held his gaze. The corridor was quiet around them, the sounds of the summit distant, voices, movement, the hum of important people doing important things. I need to finish this summit, she said finally. I know that's not a rejection. I know that too. And he almost smiled, more visible than any expression she'd seen from him all week. I'm a patient man, he said. When I decide something is worth waiting for, I wait. She stood alone in the corridor for a long moment. Then she exhaled and went back to work. The gala began at 7 sharp. 250 guests and formal were filled the rooftop terrace as the sun set, and the Charlotte skyline lit up in blues and golds that matched the event design so perfectly it looked intentional. Nora positioned herself near the east side of the space, close enough to monitor everything, far enough to handle problems invisibly. She was reviewing the auction sequence when the first problem appeared. Marcus Bellwether. Again, he'd been managed all day, kept occupied with meetings and photo opportunities, plenty of attention without access to anything he could damage. That arrangement had apparently failed, because Marcus was now standing in the center of the terrace, drink in hand, voice rising, face flushed with the confidence of a man who'd been drinking since the afternoon session and decided tonight was the night to settle every grievance he'd been carrying. And he was aiming all of it at Kwame Asani, the summit's lead international sponsor, a man whose continued support was worth nearly $2 million to next year's programming. Nora moved immediately, but the terrace was crowded and she was on the wrong side of it. She calculated angles as the confrontation escalated. You think you can come into this country and lecture us about innovation? Marcus's voice carried across the terrace. Your firm has been copying American models for 20 years. Kwame's expression went cold and still. Around them, conversations paused. Heads turned. 2 journalists near the bar reached for their phones. Nora pushed through a cluster of guests, but she wasn't going to make it in time. And then 3 things happened at once. Jin-Ho appeared at Marcus's elbow like he'd materialized out of the crowd. He laughed at something Marcus hadn't actually said, clapped him on the shoulder, and smoothly redirected the confrontation into what looked, from the outside, like an enthusiastic debate about market competition. Within 40 seconds, Marcus was laughing. His anger transformed into something resembling friendly argument. At the same moment, Wei Cheng positioned himself between Marcus and the nearest camera crew. He didn't block them, not obviously. He simply occupied the space, asked a journalist a question about their coverage of regional infrastructure, and created enough of a physical barrier that the cameras found nothing worth filming and moved on. And Daniel walked directly to Kwame and drew him into a quiet conversation on the far side of the terrace. Unhurried, like he'd been planning to speak with him all evening, and the timing was simply coincidence. Within a minute, Kwame's expression had softened, and the tension in his shoulders had released. The whole thing took less than 3 minutes. No one in the room, except Nora, understood what had just happened. She stood still for a moment after it resolved. 3 men, 3 completely different responses, all of them correct. Jin-Ho had protected the feeling, the energy of the room, the relationships holding everything together. Wei Cheng had protected the result, the coverage, the narrative that would follow this evening into tomorrow's news cycle. And Daniel had protected the person, going directly to the man who'd been hurt, making sure he felt valued before the hurt could settle into something permanent. Nora looked across the terrace to where Daniel still spoke quietly with Kwame. She remembered something she'd said to Renee 3 days ago, in passing, while reviewing the sponsor list. Kwame took a real risk supporting this summit. He deserves to have a good evening. She'd said that to Renee. Renee hadn't spoken to any of the 3 men, which meant Daniel had been listening, paying attention to what mattered to her before she'd even told him it mattered. She felt something shift in her chest. Something she wasn't ready to name yet, but couldn't ignore anymore. The rest of the gala unfolded without crisis. The live auction raised more than projected. The keynote donor address got a standing ovation. The energy stayed warm and generous through the final hour. By 11, guests had begun filtering toward the exits, full of champagne and goodwill and the particular satisfaction of an evening that had exceeded expectations. Nora stood near the terrace railing, watching them go. She'd done it. Another event, another success, another thing she'd built from nothing and held together through pressure and delivered without anyone seeing most of what made it possible. She should have felt satisfied. She did feel satisfied, but she also felt something else, something that had been building all week and had nowhere left to hide. Nora. She turned. All 3 of them were standing there. Jin-Ho, Wei Cheng, Daniel. They hadn't planned this. She could tell from the brief glance that passed between them. A recognition that was neither hostile nor coordinated. They'd simply all arrived at the same moment, drawn by the same instinct. The terrace was nearly empty now. A few staff cleared tables. A photographer packed equipment. The Charlotte skyline held steady behind all of them. Jin-Ho spoke first. "We leave tomorrow. Early. I wanted to say goodbye properly." She looked at him. This man who'd made her feel visible all week, who'd waited in corridors and asked for minutes of her time and never once made her feel like she owed him anything in return. "Jin-Ho," she said, "you're remarkable." He heard the shape of that sentence. She watched him receive it. "But," he said quietly. "Not but," she said, "just entirely sincerely. What I feel when I'm with you is seen, appreciated, like I'm the most interesting person in any room. And that's not a small thing. That's actually very rare." He nodded slowly. "But it's not enough," he said. Not bitterly, just understanding. "It's not that it's not enough," she said carefully. "It's that I already know I'm interesting. I already know I'm worth paying attention to. What I need isn't someone to remind me of that." She held his gaze. "What I need is something I'm still figuring out how to describe." He was quiet a moment. Then he smiled. Not the performance smile, the real one. "If you're ever in Seoul," he said, "I hope you'll call me. Not for this. Just because I think you're someone I'd like to know for a very long time." "I'd like that too," she said, and meant it. He stepped back. Wei Cheng moved forward, his expression controlled, but she could see the question in his eyes. "I meant what I said earlier," he said. "About waiting. About patience. I know you did." She looked at him. This brilliant, precise man who'd challenged her mind in ways that felt like discovering a new language, who'd admitted things he probably never said out loud, who'd looked at her work like it was the most interesting problem he'd encountered in years. "Wei Cheng," she said, "the way you see things, the way you think, that's extraordinary. The conversations we've had this week have mattered to me. They made me sharper. They've made me consider things I hadn't thought about before." She paused. "But I don't think we want the same kind of life. You want someone who fits into your system, someone who can be categorized and understood and integrated into the way you've built your world. And I can't be that. I don't want to be that. I need someone who doesn't need to understand me completely in order to choose me." He was still for a long moment. "That's fair," he said finally. "I don't agree with all of it. But it's fair. I know you don't agree. You knew I wouldn't. I knew you'd hear it honestly," she said. "That was more important." He nodded once, precise, the way he did everything. "If you change your mind," he said, "I'm not difficult to find." "I know." He turned and walked toward the exit. She watched him go. And then there was Daniel. He hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. He'd simply stood there, watching her say goodbye to the other two, waiting for whatever came next with the patience of a man who understood some things couldn't be rushed. She turned to face him fully. The terrace was empty now, except for the two of them. The city glittered below. "I thought about it," she said. "All night. Most of it." She took a step toward him. "You came to this summit because of a name on a document," she said. "Because of what someone's work said about who they were. You flew across the country on a hunch." "It wasn't a hunch," he said. "It was a recognition." "A recognition of what?" "Of someone worth knowing." He paused. "Of someone worth crossing for." She looked at him. "I'm not easy," she said. "I work constantly. I carry things I don't always say out loud. I've never lived anywhere but the East Coast. I don't know what a relationship looks like with someone who lives across the world." "Neither do I." "Does that concern you?" "Many things concern me," he said. "Uncertainty doesn't stop me from moving toward what's right." "How do you know what's right?" "Because for the first time in a very long time," he said quietly, "I'm not calculating. I'm not measuring outcomes or weighing probabilities. When I look at you, I simply know." She felt something break open in her chest. Not painfully like a door that had been stuck for a long time, finally swinging wide. "You see what I carry," she said. "Yes. I've seen it all week. And you stayed anyway." "Yes." He stepped closer. "Because seeing what someone carries isn't a reason to leave. It's a reason to help them hold it." Her eyes burned. She didn't let the tears fall. "Daniel," she said. "Yes. I'm choosing you." He went very still. "Not because you're the safest choice," she continued. "Not because you're the most certain. But because you're the one who sees me clearly. All of me. The parts that are strong, and the parts that are tired, and the parts that don't know how to stop working long enough to let someone take care of me." She paused. "And you chose me anyway. Before I was ready. Before I even knew this was something I was looking for." He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically. Not possessively. Just a connection, steady and warm. "I've waited my whole adult life for someone I didn't have to perform for," he said. "Someone I could simply be present with. Someone who didn't need me to fill every silence with words." He looked at her. "When I found that person, I wasn't going to let timing or distance or fear stop me from telling her the truth." She looked down at their hands together. His fingers were warm and certain against hers. "The summit ends tomorrow," she said. "You fly home." "Yes." "And then what?" "And then we figured out," he said simply. "Calls, flights, whatever it takes, however long it requires." He paused. "I didn't cross the country to give up because the logistics are complicated." She almost laughed. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," he said. "Not easy, but simple. I choose you. You choose me. Everything else is just details." She looked up at him. The skyline glowed behind them. The gala was over. The summit was ending. And standing on a rooftop in the city where they'd met, Nora Vance made a choice she hadn't planned for and didn't regret. "Okay," she said. "Okay. We figured out." He exhaled slowly, and she realized it was the first time all week she'd seen him release tension he'd been holding. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For being brave enough to choose something uncertain." She squeezed his hand. "You came to a summit because of my name on a document," she said. "That was brave first. I'm just catching up." He smiled, the first full smile she'd seen from him. It changed his entire face. "Nora Vance," he said. "Daniel Okafor. I'm going to spend the rest of my life being grateful for this week." "That's a long time." "Yes," he said. "It is." And standing on the rooftop, with the city lights spread below them and the future spread out ahead, they didn't need to say anything else. They simply stood there together, two people who had found each other in the middle of chaos and chosen each other despite every complication. 1 year later, the wedding was small by Okafor family standards. 110 guests, a venue overlooking the harbor, a ceremony that blended traditions from both sides of an ocean. Nora's mother flew in with her closest friends and cried through the entire thing. Renee gave a toast that made everyone laugh and Nora tear up. Jin-Ho sent flowers and a note. "You chose well, both of you." And yes, I'm still waiting for that call. Wei Cheng sent a bottle of wine older than both of them, with a card that read simply, "Some questions don't have clear answers." Yours did. I'm glad. When Daniel took her hands and made his promises, he spoke in 2 languages. "You taught me that strength isn't silence," he said in the first. "That protecting someone means standing beside them, not in front of them." Then, in English, "You're the first person who made me want to be known, not managed, not understood strategically. Known. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you feel the same way. Nora's vows were shorter. She'd never been good at long speeches. I spent years building things for other people, she said, making their visions possible, protecting their moments. She looked at him. You're the first person who made me want to build something for myself. Something that's ours. I choose you, today, tomorrow, for all the days I have left. 3 years later, Nora stood in the lobby of the Marbury Grand and watched the setup for the annual Growth Forum with the particular satisfaction of someone who'd been here before. She wasn't running this one. She was attending. Her own consulting firm, built from scratch over the last 3 years with offices on 2 continents, was one of the summit's partners now. Her team was backstage, supporting a new events director through her first major international conference. Nora had trained her personally, the systems, the contingency planning, the art of staying calm when everything fell apart. And she told her the most important thing: protect the people, not just the event. That's what makes the difference between good and unforgettable. Daniel appeared at her elbow. He'd flown in the day before, rearranging his schedule as he always did for moments that mattered to her. Remember, he said, the glass against the wall? She laughed. That was day one. That was the moment I knew. You knew that early? I knew you were someone worth watching, he said. I knew that becoming someone worth choosing would take longer. He smiled. I was prepared to wait. You didn't have to wait long. No, he agreed. You were faster than I expected. She looked around the ballroom. The same space, different people, different energy, but the bones of it the same. The chaos, the pressure, the particular magic of bringing hundreds of strangers together and hoping something meaningful happened between them. 2 people who'd found each other in chaos. 2 people who'd built something neither of them had planned for. 2 people who'd learned, over time, that the strongest things weren't the ones that never bent. They were the ones that bent and held. If this story made you feel something, hit subscribe, drop a comment below, and like the video so more people can find it. Share it with someone who needs to remember that being strong and being loved were never opposites.